Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is Benjamin Hawkins. Now, Benjamin Hawkins was a young man who grew up in North Carolina and traveled all the way to New Jersey so he could attend Princeton. Unfortunately, the American Revolutionary War broke out, and that prohibited Princeton from carrying on classes. Therefore, this young man decided, I need to go make my name somehow. So he decided to travel to the Continental Army. He signed up and became a member of George Washington's staff, in no small part to the fact that he already had mastered several languages. This was important because Washington needed a middleman to communicate with all these French officers that Benjamin Franklin and Silas Deane were sending over from Europe, because Washington didn't really speak French and many of these officers didn't really speak English. As I said, fortunately, Benjamin Hawkins spoke both. He did this for about 2 years until the Marquis de Lafayette showed up and was able to get through these issues with Washington and the French officers. And Hawkins actually went back down to North Carolina, where he was elected to the state, not colonial, state now, House of Representatives. That House of Representatives sent him back north to go to the Continental Congress. And while he was working with the Continental Congress, since he was so good at language, he was asked to communicate with several Native American tribes. And he ended up spending most of the 1780s communicating with different Native American tribes, trying to establish peace between the young United States and their neighbors in situations that traditionally had been pretty hostile and in the future would again be hostile. But we'll get to that. In the late 1780s, North Carolina had its ratification convention for the U.S. Constitution, the second one that approved it, and Benjamin Hawkins went to that meeting and did vote for the United States Constitution. However, he did become what was then called an anti-administration candidate. The anti-administration party quickly developed into the Jeffersonian Democratic Republican Party as we know it today. Now, despite this, or perhaps because of this, North Carolina sent him as an inaugural member to the United States Senate. Granted, that body had already been meeting about a year, and North Carolina was very late to the game. They really, at first, rejected the United States Constitution, but after there were already 11 states signed up, North Carolina was like, okay, fine. And they sent Hawkins, who spent 6 years in the George Washington administration in the United States Senate. Now, when his term came to an end, he did not seek re-election. Instead, he was appointed by George Washington as the General Superintendent of Indian Affairs. And as General Superintendent of Indian Affairs, he was essentially a diplomat to all the Native American nations from Ohio south. During this time, he did travel a good deal to meet many Native American tribes, but he notably went and lived among the Creek in Virginia. And while he was with the Creek, he actually settled a plantation there and would spend the rest of his life living there. And he worked very hard. The Creek were one of the larger Native American tribes on the borders of the young United States, at least. And not only that, they were very powerful and important. So that's why he went and lived among them. And he tried his best to look out for them. Now, as opposed to today, where the debate would be, should we promote Native Americans keeping their culture, or should we promote Native Americans trying to assimilate? I am not taking a side in either one. That seems to be the discussion today. Back then, the more touchy-feely, I guess you could say, the more heartfelt side was, let's try and have them assimilate. The other side of that argument was, let's start wars with them and clear the Native Americans out. Benjamin Hawkins took the let's try and have them assimilate because he truly did believe assimilation was best for everyone, including the Native Americans, that they could live together in peace. And he spent decades keeping things peaceful between the Native Americans, especially, again, the Creek and the Americans. Now, at a certain point, after years and years, and I should note, it seems to be that the Creek actually had Benjamin Hawkins marry a woman of that nation because he was so endeared by them. They did accept him as a part of their community, and marrying into the family, so to speak, he became essentially part of the Creek Nation, an unofficial member of the Creek Nation. Unfortunately, eventually, some of the younger members of the tribe were sick of assimilating and wanted to be their own nation, as they were accustomed to doing. And this started a civil war, often called the Creek Civil War. It was literally, not always, but primarily younger generation versus the older generation. It actually broke out into war. Hawkins tried to play negotiator and stop this from happening, uh, and that didn't work out very well. Now, this happened to coincide, again, 20 years had gone by since the revolution. The Creek Civil War coincided with the War of 1812. So it's not like the Americans were paying all that much attention to internal problems between Native American tribes as long as they were staying out of this particular war. So they did the war was settled when a man named Andrew Jackson showed up. Yes, that Andrew Jackson showed up and put a stop to the war. I should also know Benjamin Hawkins did join the war by recruiting a unit of pro-United States Creek, but that didn't seem to help too much because, as I said, Andrew Jackson would show up and just put a stop to the war, as Andrew Jackson was wont to do. And Hawkins was real upset because he tried to make it to the treaty negotiations because he did want to look out for the Creek as best as he could, but he didn't make it in time. Travel was slow back then. He did not make it in time, and Andrew Jackson and his people essentially took all of the Creek land, almost all of it. And then there's a sad note that, 20 years later, Andrew Jackson would be president, and he would establish the Trail of Tears, which the Creek were one of the major victims of. As for Benjamin Hawkins, he lived for a few more years with the Creek, but then, he had aged a lot over the time period we've just discussed, and he passed away just 2 years later. But that's the story of Benjamin Hawkins, who had an amazingly important career on the western boundary of the young United States with the Native Americans. It's an often overlooked part of the Revolutionary War and American framing. So I hope I could bring that to your attention. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this, definitely hit like. Leave a comment, ask a question. I'm always happy to answer. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. I put out videos 5 days a week, including every Wednesday, aka tomorrow, a live video where we will talk about the last 7 founders of the day from my website, founderoftheday.com. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I'm Jason, and I'll be back with you for a live video tomorrow.